All right, welcome to the video where I explain how to fill out the HOA addendum. And you'll notice that neither of those are in any of the title of the contract. So it actually says addendum for property subject to mandatory membership in a property owner association. And it actually says don't use this for condominiums because condominiums already have a condo association. All right, so this is different. This is only for single family homes. So if you want a quick way to find this property or this contract, just look down here. It's track number 36-8. All right, so if you check the box on the 1 to 4 family that says the home your buyer is purchasing is in HOA, then that should trigger this document. So here's why this is important. Here's what you're doing is you are putting in writing the need to have the association's documents delivered to the buyer. And so what's in those documents? Well, they're called covenants and restrictions, or CCRs, and they notify the buyer as to what they can and cannot do in their home. So that could range anywhere from choosing paint color for the outside of the home, or you can't work on your car in the driveway, or you can't use it as a rental property. There's lots of different things in there. The document is large, but that does not exclude your buyer from having to read it. It's important. So let's talk about the delivery of these documents. So in this day and age, you will go to probably a link online for these documents. And this is actually governed by TREC now. And all of the HOAs, the association's names, should have these documents ready on a website. And theoretically, the name of the association should be in the listing somewhere towards the top. Okay. So in my example, I have the address, I have the subdivision name, and the first option is subdivision information. This means a current copy of the restrictions applying to the subdivision and bylaws and rules of the association, and a resale certificate, all of which are described by section 207.003 of the Texas Property Code. Resale certificate is a one-pager that pretty much illustrates the financial status of the HOA. So there's a monthly fee or a quarterly fee, or maybe it's just an annual fee that the buyer will pay into the HOA in exchange for different things. Um, and the resale certificate, again, explains what the financial status is of the HOA. So the first option is, in my example, and again, all the information in here is fictitious. It's for sample purposes only. Your answers will likely vary depending on the situation. But I do think that 14 days is probably pretty generous. So within 14 days after the effective date of the contract, seller shall obtain, pay for, and deliver the subdivision information to the buyers. That includes the resale certificate. If the seller delivers the subdivision information, buyer may terminate the contract within 3 days after the buyer receives it. So in other words, they have 14 days to get it to you. And once they get it to you, if the buyer looks through there and doesn't like something, they have 3 days from that point to get out of the contract. And the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. That's why it's important to pay attention, especially in the case of your home being in an HOA. The second option is within X amount of days after the effective date of the contract, the buyer shall obtain, pay for, and deliver a copy of the subdivision information to the seller. Okay? And then the third option is buyer has received and approved the subdivision information before signing the contract. Buyer either does or does not require an updated resale certificate. Now, the buyer may not, but the title company and lender may. So, all these documents need to be accounted for. And just because the buyer doesn't care doesn't mean that the lender or the title company won't care. Okay. So it then goes on to say material changes. So if the subdivision information that was given originally is, 10 years old and something has changed since then and the seller knows it, they have to tell the buyer. All right. And they have um, time to, say, hey, buyer has time to say, hey, given this new information, I don't want to move forward. And the earnest money is going to be uh, returned to the buyer. So let's talk about paragraph C, the fees. So it says, except as provided by paragraphs A, D, and E, buyer shall pay any and all association fees or other charges associated with the transfer of the property not to exceed X amount. Now, recently they put a cap on this to where it can't cost more than $375. So you want to put a low number in here because you represent the buyer, because it says not to exceed a certain amount here in this blank, and the seller shall pay any excess. So maybe you put $100 in. I think that's pretty reasonable. It's not going to be any more than $375 anyway. Okay. Um, and then lastly, notice to buyer regarding repairs by the association. The association may have the sole responsibility to make certain repairs to the property. If you are concerned about the condition of any part of the property which the association is required to repair, you should not sign the contract unless you are satisfied that the association will make the desired repairs. So this isn't really common these days, but it is common for the HOA to maintain the sidewalks and the landscaping, things of that nature. So that's kind of what they're talking about here. All right, so this is just a one pager, pretty self-explanatory. And here are the spaces for signatures for both buyer and seller. All right, so that is how you fill out the HOA addendum.